Fellas, today we're going to be creating the perfect MMA fighter. Now, what I mean by that is we take attributes from different fighters and put it all into one fighter and try and make them kind of like the most flawless, the greatest MMA fighter we can possibly make with what we've got. I did a very similar video to this quite long ago. It was kind of fighter combinations in the UFC. So I took two fighters in the UFC from one weight class with the best martial arts or the best attributes and combine them to make them as best as possible. We're going to be doing a very similar concept to that, but we're going to be including every weight class, every fighter that's possible in the UFC right now, and we're just going to be creating the perfect MMA fighter. If you agree or you want more videos like this, please let me know, but we're going to go straight in there with the first kind of attribute, which is head movement. And for head movement, I'm going Chris Curtis. I think Chris Curtis is very underrated. Head movement wise. A lot of people talk about him. Listen, I understand that he's a clown on Twitter, right? He's barely ranked at middleweight, which is quite poor to say that he's a star in the UFC. Well, he's not really a star, but he's a name in the UFC. But he's actually got decent head movement. Obviously, the head movement that he showed against Buckley, the head movement that he showed on UFC 287 against Gastelum. I know he lost that fight, but he still showed that he's got a head movement. He's got some really good head movement. As part of his great defense, he's overall a defensively very sound fighter. Is Chris Curtis. I know obviously he had the loss to Kelvin Gastelum, but still, head movement's head movement. And not only that, look at his grappling as well. I know this has nothing to do with head movement, but he's actually got some of the best grappling defense in the UFC. I think he's never been taken down in his entire MMA career. And if he has, it's only been once or twice, because I think he's got a flawless takedown defense record as well. But anyway, head movement, I'm going Chris Curtis. Other people, you could go for Bobby Green. Bobby Green's got a good head movement as well. But whatever you do, don't go for Shavkat Rakhmonov for this, because Shavkat Rakhmonov, I don't think he's ever moved his head in his life. So if you're going to go with anyone, go with Chris Curtis for flawless head movement. And I think if you've got Chris Curtis's head movement defensively, you're already very sound. Next up, we have chin. Now, for chin, there's a couple options, but I'm going to go Max Holloway. It was always going to be either Max Holloway or Marvin Vettori, let's be honest. But I'm going to go Max Holloway, especially after UFC Singapore, with that crazy fight he had with the Korean Zombie. Max Holloway's been through it all. He fought Prime McGregor. He fought Volkanovski 3 times. Korean Zombie. Brian Ortega. Yair Rodriguez, all these people that he's fought. Who else? Jose Aldo as well. He's fought so many people, and he's never been wobbled. Not only has he's never been dropped, he's got such a good chin. I'm convinced you could put him in there with Prime Francis Ngannou, and his chin would still not be wobbled at all. He's got such a good chin, and I think if you have Max Holloway's chin, you're going to be a very safe fighter. You can kind of afford to be more risky. Yeah, I'm going with Max Holloway for chin. Again, you could go with somebody like what's his name, Marvin Vettori, but I'm going to go Max Holloway. He's been in some wars in his career, and he's about to fight Josh Emmett. I'm pretty sure it was announced that he's going to be fighting Josh Emmett in December, and Josh Emmett is a hard hitter. So if he can survive Josh Emmett, we've got a dangerous chin on our hands. But Max Holloway's chin, never been knocked out, never been wobbled. Incredible chin for Max Holloway, and if you've got his chin, mix that with Chris Curtis's head movement, it's going to be very hard to get finished on the feet, in my opinion. But that's chin. Next up, we have power. Now, if you've got a good chin and some good power, then you're probably going to be one of the fighters that tend to scrap a lot. And for power, I'm going with Derek Lewis. People are going to complain and say Sergey Pavlovich this, Sergey Pavlovich that. First of all, Sergey Pavlovich, I'm aware that he's a very, very hard hitter, but Sergey Pavlovich, I don't think he hits as hard as Derek Lewis. First of all, obviously Derek Lewis has way more. I think he's got the most knockouts in UFC heavyweight history, or the most knockouts that on every UFC heavyweight on the roster. But Sergey Pavlovich is more of a volume and accuracy fighter. He's insanely accurate. He's got really long arms. He's a high volume pressure fighter, and that's why Sergey Pavlovich, mixed with his power, is able to get a lot of finishes. Whereas I feel like Derek Lewis doesn't have that. All Derek Lewis has is power. I mean, he's got other, I'm not saying that's all he has. He's got other things here and there, but as a heavyweight, all he's really reliant on is his power. The fight with Alexander Volkov is a great example of that. Derek Lewis has, in my opinion, he's the hardest hitter in the UFC. You put Sergey Pavlovich and Derek Lewis on a punch machine, Derek Lewis is getting more. His record backs it up as well, the amount of knockouts he's got. I mean, he's coming off a first-round knockout as well, so I'm going to go Derek Lewis. This is looking to be a dangerous fighter, man. The chin of Max Holloway, the head movement of Curtis, and the power of Derek Lewis. If you're getting into a scrappy situation, listen, you've got the power of Derek Lewis, you're sleeping anyone, but it's all good having power, but without the speed, you've got nothing. So for speed, I'm going with Brandon Moreno. Brandon Moreno's speed and Derek Lewis's power might just be one of the most dangerous fighters in the UFC history. This is a dangerous fighter we've got going on here. Let's just say that we've got a dangerous fighter going on. But Brandon Moreno's speed, I think, is the fastest in the UFC hand-wise. Like I said, I already did a video explaining all this. It's called UFC Fighters with the Best Attributes, along the lines of that. But I'm going with Brandon Moreno for speed. I mean, first of all, he's in the flyweight division. You know, the lightest people, you can't speak. The lighter people, you kind of assume that they're going to be a lot faster. I'm picking him over people like Kai Kara France, Davison Figueiredo, Pantoja. I feel like Pantoja and Figueiredo are more like power. I feel like they're more reliant on power as well as other things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But Brandon Moreno showed speed many times. The fight with Kai Kara France, the 3 fights he's had with Pantoja, the 4 fights he's had with Davison Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno's always shown speed. So I'm going with Brandon Moreno for speed. And I think this alone, you could use all these 4 attributes, and I think you're already getting a GOAT contender. That alone, but we're moving on to something else here. That alone could be the greatest of all time. But we're going on to something else, leg kicks. It's got to be Justin Gaethje. There's no one else for it. Justin Gaethje has to be leg kicks. He's chewed the legs of so many people. The fight with Dustin Poirier, the first one. The fight with Edson Barboza. His fights with Eddie Alvarez. I know he lost one, but the fight with Eddie Alvarez, the Tony Ferguson fight, the Faziev fight. Justin Gaethje probably has the best leg kicks in UFC. They're very, very quick. They're very hard to check. And when he does, they hit hard. His opponents show that whenever Justin Gaethje is attacking that leg, they get battered. Look at Dustin Poirier's leg after the Gaethje fight. It was brutal. If we're talking about current UFC, obviously I know people are going to bring up Aldo as well. Aldo had great leg kicks, but if we're talking about current UFC, it's got to be Gaethje. If you have the leg kicks of Gaethje, you're going to be a scary kicker. Imagine having the leg kicks of Justin Gaethje and going against someone like Ryan Spann, who barely moves his legs, and when he does, it's just for mobility. Imagine a Ryan Spann versus Justin Gaethje. That would be crazy. But either way, Justin Gaethje's leg kicks, they're gonna compromise your opponent's leg massively. Your opponent's gonna be significantly disadvantaged by the leg kicks alone. So, if I had to pick a fighter's leg kicks, I'm going with Justin Gaethje. Next up, we have Fight IQ, and there's only one man for it, and it's John Jones. Who else has Fight IQ like John Jones in the UFC right now? Who are we going for? Islam Volkanovski? It's got to be John Jones. He's got the best fight IQ. He's been in the UFC, I'm pretty sure it's since 2009. He's undefeated. He's never lost a fight. He dominates nearly every opponent. He's extremely smart. Say what you want about him. Bring up the PEDs. Bring up the history. Say you don't like him. You don't even have to call him the greatest of all time. But what you do have to say is, out of everyone in the UFC right now, John Jones has the best fight IQ. And he does. He knows what to do at the right time. I argue that if you had John Jones's brain, and maybe you were quite tall and lanky like him, you'd be the greatest of all time already. All you need is John Jones's fight IQ. Never mind all the other attributes. You have John Jones's fight IQ. It's the brain and the muscle, really. But yeah, if you have John Jones's fight IQ, you're going to be unstoppable. I mean, this alone is the greatest of all time fighter out of all these attributes. But the fight IQ of John Jones, he's got the best fight IQ in the UFC. No one's going above him, so I don't need to explain it for too long. It's John Jones. And finally, we're going with knees. And it's got to be Alex Pereira. I mean, that knee knockout he got in his early UFC career, I forgot the opponent, but that brutal knee knockout, you've seen him in Glory Kickboxing as well. He's got some good takedown defense from his knees as well. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't aim for a takedown against Alex Pereira. That's probably your best shot at winning the fight, because you're not beating this guy on the feet. But his knees are insane. Whether they're in the clinch, whether he's going for a flying knee, whether you go for a takedown and get face first, to get his knee face first, whatever it is, Alex Pereira, he's really tall as well. What is he, like 6'4"? He's got some vicious knees as Alex Pereira. And if you've got the knees of Alex Pereira, you're unstoppable in the clinch. You've got a threat, you've got a takedown defense threat as well. The flying knees that this guy produces as well are absolutely insane. So, listen, Alex Pereira, it's got to be Alex Pereira for knees. Glory Kickboxing champion, UFC champion. He's going to be a light heavyweight champion soon. It's because of his striking. It's because of how well he can kick. And in my opinion, he's got the best knees in the UFC. So I'm going with Alex Pereira for knees. And that's the attributes done. Now we're going to talk about martial arts, right? So if you could pick one fighter for every martial art, who are you picking? Personally, let's talk about boxing and wrestling. Let's talk about boxing and wrestling first. Well, no, let's talk about boxing first. For boxing or striking, we'll go Alex Pereira again. Boxing, he's one of the he's one of the most powerful boxers in the UFC right now. He hits like a truck. He's the hardest hitter in the light heavyweight division. I don't need to explain why. Look at his glory kickboxing fights. Look at his UFC fights. He hits like a truck. And then his kicks, like I just explained, his knees and his kicks, how he can use his range perfectly. He's a threat on the feet. And in my opinion, I think he's the best striker in the UFC right now. I'm not saying he's necessarily the best boxer. I'm not saying he's necessarily the best kicker. But if you overall round up striking, who do I think's the best striker, pure striker in the UFC? It's Alex Pereira for me. I think he's the best striker in the UFC. And if you have Alex Pereira striking, his knees, maybe just have Justin Gaethje's leg kicks as well, and every other attribute, you're unstoppable. So having Alex Pereira striking would make you the biggest threat on the feet. And then move on to wrestling. It's got to be Islam Makhachev. There's a couple people out there. There's Hamzat Chimaev, I guess, but he hasn't really shown it at a top level yet. It could be Bo Nickel as well. It's questionable. It's between Islam and Bo Nickel, but because I've seen a lot more from Islam in the UFC right now, I'm going with Islam Makhachev for wrestling. Imagine having Alex Pereira striking in Islam's wrestling. That alone would probably make you an unstoppable force. That would make you an absolute killer. Having the takedown defense backed up by Islam Makhachev's wrestling, and then the threat on the feet by Alex Pereira striking, you're unstoppable. Having that alone would be incredible. And to be honest, I don't even need to talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because Islam Makhachev has got some of the best sambo in the UFC. In fact, he's probably got the best right now, let's be honest. But Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it has to go none other than Charles de Bronx Oliveira. He's the best at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the UFC. There's a couple of people up there. You can go with, I don't know, Gilbert Burns, but it's got to be Oliveira. We're going to see at UFC 294. What's better, Sambo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? We'll have to see, but I'm going with Oliveira for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And this for me is already, I don't need to add anything else. This is a perfect fighter. If you have that striking, Alex Pereira for striking, Islam for wrestling, Charles Oliveira for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then you have all the other attributes from all the other top level fighters, in my opinion, you have got an unstoppable, undefeated, impossible to lose fighter. And that, for me, is the perfect MMA fighter. Please let me know if you agree with this fighter, or if I should have added any other attributes, or if you disagree with any points. And yeah, thank you for watching.